I never imagined that a simple violation notice would spark a full-blown battle. However, when the HOA towed all my cars and slapped me with outrageous fines, they had no clue who they were dealing with. Picture their shock when they found out the towing company they hired to punish me was actually mine. How far would you go if an HOA tried to take what's yours? Welcome to my channel. If you enjoy wild HOA revenge tales, hit the subscribe button and let's dive in. The bright orange violation notice was impossible to miss, taped right in the center of my front door like a coward's warning shot, afraid to deliver it in person. It read, "Excessive vehicles violation. Immediate action required. Fine $500. My brows knit together as I read the letter, growing more irritated with each bureaucratic threat buried in the fine print. The HOA, wrapped in their self-righteousness, had suddenly decided my driveway was a problem. My so-called crime, owning 3 cars, my wife Emily's Audi Q5, my Porsche 911, and my daughter Lily's Honda Civic, all parked neatly in our own driveway. No overgrown weeds, no oil stains ruining the pavement, no abandoned junkers hogging space. Just 3 well-maintained, legally registered cars parked exactly where I had every right to keep them after buying this house. I let out a sharp breath and stepped back inside, the notice still in my hand. My wife Emily was in the kitchen, sipping coffee, her laptop open as she reviewed patient notes for her work. The next hospital shift was coming up. She looked up and caught the look on my face. "What now?" she asked, setting down her mug. Karen Mitchell, our insufferable HOA president, had become a notorious figure in the neighborhood. Every community had one. The power-hungry tyrant who acted like managing the HOA was more important than leading a nation. She lived just 2 houses away, a woman with a face frozen by surgery and a demeanor that made tyrants seem reasonable. She was the type who thrived on trivial control, brandishing her clipboard like a weapon and treating the bylaws as if they were sacred texts. "Apparently, we have too many cars," I said, waving the paper at Emily. "Violation, $500. Immediate action required," she frowned. "Too many cars? We have 3. That shouldn't be a problem. According to Karen, it is." I scanned the violation notice again, looking for details. A maximum of 2 vehicles per driveway was allowed. All others must be parked in the garage. I rolled my eyes. There was simply no way to fit 3 cars inside. "Your medical supplies take up half the garage, and my tools and storage boxes fill the rest." Emily's frown grew deeper. "Didn't we attend an HOA meeting last year where they said driveways were fine as long as sidewalks weren't blocked?" "Yes," I replied, flipping to the back of the notice where the exact bylaw was referenced. Amendment 14B, Residential Vehicle Limits. And guess when this rule was introduced? She did not even have to guess. Karen did this just to mess with us. Exactly that. At that very moment, my daughter Lily walked in wearing her college hoodie, stretching and yawning. "What's happening?" she murmured, rubbing her eyes. I handed her the notice. Reading it, she blinked in surprise. "Wait, my car is causing trouble now?" "Apparently," I said. "The powerful HOA dictates that only 2 vehicles can be parked on the driveway. The 3rd must go inside the garage, which is obviously impossible." Lily snorted. "Well, Karen can just choke." Emily sighed and rubbed her temples. "Are you going to confront them?" "Yes," I nodded while reaching for my keys. "I'll head to the office now and handle this." The HOA office was a small, excessively decorated room that seemed to take itself way too seriously inside the community center. The walls were covered with framed copies of the bylaws, like some bizarre shrine to pointless rules. Karen sat behind the main desk, her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose as she typed away. She looked up as I entered, flashing a fake, polite smile, the kind customer service people show when they're about to spoil your day. "Ah, Mr. Thompson," she said in a syrupy voice. "I assume you are here about the violation notice." "You assume right?" I replied, slapping the notice onto her desk. "What's the problem here? I have owned 3 cars for years, and now suddenly it's an issue." Karen pressed her lips together. "As you'll notice in the updated bylaws, we recently voted to enforce stricter rules. Parking rules are all about preserving the neighborhood's appearance and avoiding disorder." I held back a laugh. "Disorder? It is just 3 ordinary cars parked in the driveway. What comes next? Will you say my mailbox is too perfectly aligned?" Karen carefully folded her hands on her clipboard. "Rules must be followed, Mr. Thompson. If you want to contest the violation, you can submit a formal appeal, but be aware there is a non-refundable processing fee of $250. My jaw tightened. "So, if I understand correctly, you are charging me $500 for something that was acceptable a month ago, and if I want to challenge it, I have to pay just to be heard." She smiled brightly. "Yes. This helps reduce unnecessary complaints." "Unnecessary?" I said, laughing sharply. "Ma'am, I pay my fees on time. I keep my home immaculate. I do not host parties. I do not create noise. I do not cause trouble. And now you are penalizing me because my daughter's car is parked in our very own driveway." Karen's smile dimmed slightly. "I do not make the rules," she said, turning a page on her clipboard. "The community makes them." I leaned forward. "And just who in the community voted for this?" She remained silent. I smirked. "That is what I expected." "I am not paying the fine, Karen." She sighed heavily and retrieved a stapled document from a drawer, placing it neatly on the desk before me. "Then unfortunately the fine will double in 7 days, and if it remains unpaid, the HOA will take further action." The action involved towing the unauthorized vehicle at the owner's expense. I slowly exhaled through my nose, gripping the edge of the desk as I struggled to resist the urge to overturn it. Towing my cars over this was pure and unrestrained petty power. This was exactly the kind of nonsense that happened when the worst individuals were given even the slightest amount of authority. I forced a smile. "All right, Karen," I said. She brightened, clearly expecting a confrontation. "All right." "Yes," I continued, slipping the violation notice into my pocket. "You do what you must." She frowned, clearly disappointed with my answer. "Well, I'm glad you see the importance of—" I cut her off and walked away before she could finish, my mind already racing with strategies. If she wanted to play games, fine, I could play along as well. I drove home, parked in my driveway with all 3 cars still there, and leaned against my Porsche, arms crossed, staring up at Karen's house. She was watching me from her window, eyes narrowing. "Let's see what happens next," I whispered. Little did she realize that her next move would be her biggest error. The morning after my meeting with Karen, I woke to an empty driveway. All 3 cars were gone. My wife's Audi, my Porsche, my daughter's Honda, they had simply disappeared. At first, I assumed Emily might have taken the Audi early for work, but then I saw her hospital bag still by the door. My heart dropped. Karen had actually gone through with it. She had my cars towed. That crazy woman really carried out her miserable quest for control. I barely had a moment to calm down before my phone rang. Without even glancing at the caller ID, I answered. "Yeah, hello, boss." It was Eric, one of my dispatchers at the towing company I run. He said, "Hey, quick question. Do you happen to own a black Porsche, an Audi, and a silver Honda Civic?" I hesitated. "Yeah, why?" After a pause, he chuckled. Because we just towed them. I nearly dropped the phone. Wait, what? He explained. Some homeowners association called us this morning. They said they had unauthorized vehicles parked in a driveway and paid us up front. We just brought them in. A slow wave of understanding crept up my spine. The HOA had used my very own company to tow my cars. A deep laugh escaped me. So you're telling me, I said, massaging my temple, that the HOA paid us to tow my own cars to my own lot? Eric whistled. Yeah, it struck me as odd, but hey, money's money, right? Want us to process the impound or not? I smiled. Nope, just keep them there. I'll stop by later. Got it, boss. Eric snorted softly. Man, these HOA folks are something else. I hung up and let the truth sink in. Karen thought she had the upper hand. She believed she got the best of me, but in fact, she handed me a loaded weapon and dared me to fire. I stayed calm the rest of the day, carrying on as though nothing had happened. I did not make any calls to the HOA, did not vent my frustration in their office, nor sent a single email. I wanted Karen to believe I was losing control. I wanted her to relish this small triumph just before I flipped the situation so completely she would lose her bearings. Later that night, I drove down to my own impound lot, where my 3 cars waited safely behind the gate, untouched. The irony almost made me burst out laughing. I went inside, grabbed the necessary paperwork, and in less than 5 minutes had all 3 of my vehicles released at no cost. But I was far from finished. Oh no! Instead of simply taking my cars home, I came up with a better plan. I called Eric back. Hey, remember those HOA fools? Hard to forget. Yeah, do me a favor. Next time they call for a tow, accept the job, but send the cars directly to a reserved lot. No processing fees, no extra hassle. Just keep bringing them in and we will cycle them right back out. They will think I am some kind of Houdini. Eric laughed on the other end. Oh, this is going to be really entertaining. And so, the game was on. The next morning I woke up and deliberately parked all 3 cars back in the driveway. I even went outside with coffee in hand and made a big show of washing my Porsche. It wasn't long before I noticed Karen watching from across the street, clutching her clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to say something, wanted to storm over and demand an explanation. But she held back. Not yet. I smiled at her and gave a little wave. She burst in angrily. Sure enough, by lunchtime, my cars had disappeared once more. Another towing incident, another charge, another display of authority, another unsuccessful attempt. I allowed the HOA to continue their little game for 3 more rounds. 3 times they sent a tow truck. 3 times I let my own team take my cars, only for them to mysteriously reappear in my driveway the following morning. Karen was losing her composure. I noticed her watching my driveway every day, studying it as if trying to figure out how I managed to pull this off. By the 4th day, I decided to take the trolling to the next level. I instructed my guys to tow one of my cars themselves and park it back in my own impound lot, even before the HOA could get to it. The result was an enraged, completely baffled Karen, standing in my driveway yelling at the tow truck driver. This is unacceptable. That car was parked here just this morning. Where is it? The driver, who was part of the joke, simply shrugged. Ma'am, all I know is we have no order for this vehicle. It must have been moved legally. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red. She pointed accusingly at my driveway as if it had betrayed her. I saw it here this morning, she insisted. I stepped outside, stretching like I had just woken from a nap. Everything all right, Karen? Her eyes snapped to me. Where is your Porsche? I took a sip of coffee, looking around innocently. Huh? That's strange. It was just here. Must have gone for a drive. Karen's eye twitched. "This is not over," she spat, storming off toward her car. The house, oh, but it was. For 5 more days, I allowed this cycle to continue. Retrieve parked car, retrieve park. The HOA was bleeding money, burning through their tiny budget as they tried to punish me. And each time, I had the last laugh. By the end of the week, Karen called for an urgent emergency HOA meeting. I made sure to arrive slightly late. The minute I entered, the tension was palpable. The board members whispered, casting anxious glances at each other. Papers lay scattered over the table, and Karen looked like she had aged a decade in 5 days. "Mr. Thompson," Karen said, barely keeping it together, "would you care to explain how your cars keep reappearing?" I shrugged. "I don't know, Karen. Maybe they just enjoy being home." She slammed her hands on the table. "Don't pretend to be clueless. We've towed your vehicles 6 times. The board demands answers." I leaned forward. "Oh, you want answers?" The room fell completely silent. I pulled out a sheet of paper and slid it across the table. Karen hesitated before picking it up. As she read, her face turned pale. "Surprise," I said with a smirk. "It turns out I own the towing company you've been using." Karen's jaw dropped. The entire board gasped. I reclined in my chair, savoring the moment. "So technically, every time you ordered my cars to be towed, you were paying me." A long pause of stunned silence followed. Then, in a low, tense voice, "Karen," she whispered harshly, "you son of a—" Then I cut her off by standing up and clapping my hands together. Now, I believe I have made my point." Karen looked like she was about to blow up. But this was far from over, because now that she was cornered, she was on the verge of making the biggest mistake of all. Karen was falling apart. I could tell by the way she stormed across her lawn each morning, giving my driveway a glare as if sheer determination could make my cars vanish completely. It must have driven her crazy. The HOA had towed my cars repeatedly. Yet somehow they kept coming back without damage, unpaid, and parked in the exact same spots. Her anger exploded into the HOA's latest newsletter, a subtle yet aggressive piece filled with vague threats about repeat offenders and deliberate efforts to break community rules. But I knew precisely who she was targeting. She was not just angry, she was desperate. I let the game continue for another week, casually walking to my cars every morning, sipping coffee while Karen fumed across the street. At one moment I even left a note on the Porsche's windshield before it was towed. "Nice try. See you tomorrow." I had barely finished my lunch that day when Eric texted, "Yo, they just towed your Porsche again. This is getting hilarious." I laughed, shaking my head. The HOA was practically burning through its own funds, throwing money at my company just to bother me. They kept going. I was unknowingly funding my upcoming vacation through all this chaos. Although I found the situation amusing, I was well aware that Karen would not accept defeat quietly. She was bound to escalate matters, and I was fully prepared for it. The following notification was no longer about towing, but a fine of $3,000 due to repeated violations regarding vehicle storage rules. I actually laughed when I opened it. $3,000 for parking on my own driveway, they must have lost their minds. However, when I noticed the note at the bottom in bold letters, warning that failure to comply could lead to legal actions and possible liens on my property, I realized Karen was playing hardball. Her goal was not just to get me to move my vehicles, but to financially drain me. Still, I refused to give in. I let the fines accumulate, piling unopened letters on my kitchen counter as if they were trophies. I knew these fines had no legal weight, but Karen was persistent in trying to break me. When the $3,000 fine failed to intimidate me, her next letter threatened mandatory garage inspections, clearly trying to force my cars out of sight. I almost wanted to let them inspect, just to see the surprise on their faces when they found no space for the vehicles inside the garage at all. Instead, I did what anyone sane would do. I ignored the threats. Then Karen made her next move. An emergency homeowners association meeting. I received the email late at night, calling all residents together to discuss a critical issue supposedly affecting the community's well-being. The choice of words was intended to intimidate people, to make them believe something grave was at risk. And perhaps it was for Karen, because this was not about the entire neighborhood. This was personal, directed at me. I deliberately arrived late, strolling casually into the crowded room while Karen was in the middle of her angry speech. Every seat was occupied, neighbors murmuring quietly, their eyes flicking toward me as I entered. Karen froze mid-sentence the moment she spotted me. Her gaze sharpened. "Ah, Mr. Thompson," she said, managing a tight smile. "Glad you finally decided to join us." I grinned. Wouldn't want to miss the entertainment. A few soft laughs spread through the audience. Karen's jaw clenched. She cleared her throat and motioned to a slideshow behind her, where enlarged photos of my driveway were displayed like evidence from a crime scene. My Porsche, my wife's Audi, my daughter's Honda, all circled in red, as if I was running a secret car smuggling operation. "This," Karen declared, gesturing toward the screen, "is what is destroying our community." I chuckled shortly. "Parking?" Karen whipped her head toward me. "It is not just parking, Mr. Thompson. It is blatant disrespect for our rules." I crossed my arms, waiting. This was about to get interesting. "For weeks now," she went on, pacing back and forth, "we have tried repeatedly to enforce our neighborhood rules, only to be met with intentional resistance. Vehicles are towed away, only to strangely reappear. Fines are given, yet they are ignored." She faced the crowd again, raising her voice. "How can we expect to keep order when some residents think they are exempt from the rules?" A few nodded, some murmured in agreement, but most shifted uncomfortably. Karen, sensing vulnerability, jumped at the chance. She produced a new proposal and slammed it onto the table. "That is why I suggest an immediate change to our bylaws, one that would let the HOA remove vehicles directly without the owner's approval and make the offender pay all towing costs." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean without proper legal process?" Karen did not flinch. "We already have a process in place, do we not?" I scoffed. "Then explain why you have spent thousands of dollars towing my cars, yet they keep reappearing in my driveway." Karen's eye twitched. She realized I was provoking her but could not help herself. "That is a different problem we must fix." "Actually," she said sharply, "residents deserve transparency. We all have the right to understand how your cars keep returning." I smirked. Magic. A few chuckles came from the crowd. Karen looked as if she might explode. "This is no joke," she snapped. "We treat community rules seriously and will not allow anyone to mock them." I stepped forward, letting the silence linger. Then I revealed my own paper, a copy of recent invoices from my company. "Do you know what is funny, Karen?" I said loudly so everyone could hear. The only person making a fool out of the HOA is you. While you have been spending thousands of dollars on a towing company trying to punish me, I have actually been profiting from it." Karen's face went pale. Murmurs spread across the room. I threw the invoices onto the table. "It turns out the towing company you hired to tow my cars belongs to me." Karen froze in place. The board members tensed up. The entire room fell silent. I was perfectly content minding my own business. I continued, shrugging. "But you just kept provoking me. Every time you ordered a tow, every time you found me, every time you tried to ruin my life, you were paying me for it." Someone in the back started laughing out loud. Karen pounded her hands on the table. "This is a scam," she yelled. I tilted my head in response. "A scam? I did not force you to call my company. You did that all by yourself." One of the board members, a man named Greg, who usually sided with Karen, cleared his throat nervously. "Karen, is this true?" Karen tried to speak, but no words came out. I leaned closer and lowered my voice enough that only she could hear me. "Be careful, Karen," I whispered. "If you push too hard, I may have to start investigating where all the HOA money is actually going." She paled, realizing I was serious and that this was far from over. Karen was falling apart, and I could tell. The moment I saw it, I knew. When I revealed that the HOA was using my own towing company to enforce their absurd fines, I noticed a change in Karen's attitude. That firm hold she believed she had on the neighborhood began to crumble, and the support she depended on from the board faltered. Worst of all for her, she realized I was far from finished. I anticipated retaliation, but even I didn't expect her to be foolish enough to escalate things further. That morning started like any other. I woke up, grabbed my coffee, and stepped outside to admire my 3 perfectly legal cars, all parked exactly where they should be. The Porsche gleamed brightly under the morning sun. My wife's Audi remained untouched, and my daughter's Honda looked exactly the same as it had the night before. This must have driven Karen crazy. After weeks of battles over towing, she had run out of lawful options. So she resorted to what all desperate, power-hungry people do when they lose control. She broke the law. At first, I didn't notice what had happened. I got into the Porsche, turned the key, and was about to back out when I spotted it. A long, jagged scratch stretched across the driver's side door, reaching all the way to the back. This was no accident, no mistake. It was deliberate. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. I stepped out to take a closer look, and that's when I saw the broken glass. My passenger window was smashed. Footprints were on the seat. Someone had been inside my car. My stomach burned with anger, but I wasn't about to act recklessly. Instead of reacting quickly, I spun around and walked straight back into my house. I did not contact the HOA. I did not storm over to Karen's door demanding explanations. I already knew who was responsible, but more importantly, I had solid proof. I grabbed my phone and opened the live security feed from my driveway. 3 separate cameras, all equipped with night vision and recording in stunning clarity. I rewound the footage, fast-forwarding through the night until at exactly 2:37 in the morning, a figure slipped into my driveway. The person was dressed in dark clothing, hood up, moving carefully and glancing over their shoulder, but not carefully enough. I zoomed in. It was Karen. I actually burst out laughing. This woman had completely lost it. She must have believed that without a towing service to manipulate, her only choice was to damage my property herself. I watched in disbelief as she pulled out a metal key and dragged it along the paint of my car. Then, as if that was not enough, she grabbed a brick, yes, a brick, and smashed the passenger side window. The camera captured her face crystal clear. The wicked smile she gave after was the moment I realized she was done. She had crossed the line. This was more than vandalism. It was a crime. Without hesitation, I saved the video, backed it up on 3 different storage devices, and sent a copy to my lawyer. Then I made a few calls. The first was to the police. "Yes, I would like to report. I came to report an act of criminal vandalism. I have everything recorded on camera." The second step involved the insurance company. "Yes, my vehicle suffered damage. The person responsible? Don't worry, I captured clear footage of them in the act." And third, the local news. If Karen wanted to play dirty, she had no clue how far I was willing to go. The police arrived first. I stood outside, arms folded, as two officers inspected the damage to my Porsche. One of them, Officer Daniels, was already shaking his head. "This is not random," he murmured, running his hand over the deep scratches. "This was intentional." "You said you have footage?" I handed over my phone and he played the video. His eyebrows lifted. "Wait, is that?" He squinted. "This is Karen Mitchell, the OA president, right?" I smiled. "That's right." The other officer, a younger man named Rodriguez, whistled low. "She actually used a brick and didn't even cover her face." "That's careless." Daniels nodded. "Yes, this case is straightforward. We will file the report." "You're going to press charges, I assume?" I said with a wider grin. "Without a doubt." Karen had spent weeks trying to ruin my life, but this was different. She had no legal way to get rid of my cars, so she chose to commit a crime. Now she would face the consequences. The next step of my plan was even better. It wasn't only the police I contacted, but also the local news station. When the reporters arrived that afternoon, with the camera crew following closely, the entire neighborhood gathered to watch. I made sure to provide them with everything. The damage to my car was captured from every possible angle. The history of harassment by the HOA was explained in great detail. Security footage showing Karen vandalizing my property was broadcast for the whole town to witness. By the moment Karen noticed what was going on, it was already too late. She stormed across the street, her face flushed with anger. Just as the reporter turned to interview me, she snapped, "You are exaggerating this whole situation." The reporter remained calm, unflinching, and asked, "Ma'am, are you denying that the person in this video is you?" Karen opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. She was cornered. Denying it would mean lying to the entire town on live television. Confessing would be admitting to a crime. I crossed my arms, struggling to hide a smile. "So, Karen," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "what is the HOA's position on criminal activity?" The neighborhood fell into complete silence. Then someone laughed. It was Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who had been fined by Karen last summer for having the wrong color flower pots. "Well, well," she declared. "Looks like Karen is the real problem in this community, doesn't she?" More neighbors murmured in agreement. Karen glanced around, grasping what was happening. She was losing. The HOA board members who had once supported her blindly now avoided eye contact. Neighbors who had previously feared her penalties were— the police now stared at her as if she were the offender. And in fact, she was. An officer stepped forward and said, "Mrs. Mitchell, you will need to come with us." Karen spun around, exclaiming, "What? This is absurd. I was just—" Then she stopped abruptly. There was no defense left for her, no escape route. I saw them put the handcuffs on her right there on the street. The cameras captured every moment. The once mighty Karen Mitchell, the HOA queen, was stuffed into the police car's back seat while the whole neighborhood looked on. I stood with my arms folded, a satisfied smile on my face. This was not simply revenge, it was justice, and the start of something bigger. Karen's arrest did not mark the conclusion of this battle. Instead, it signaled the beginning of the end. She had believed she could intimidate the community without consequence, wielding fines and regulations as weapons against anyone daring to oppose her. But now her wrists were bound in the squad car, her reputation shattered, and her empire falling apart around her. Still, I knew the HOA would not just collapse quietly. There were more deceivers lurking in that group. They would rush to protect themselves, disassociate from Karen, and pretend they were innocent bystanders. I was determined not to allow that. Karen might have been the face of the HOA's oppression, but she had not acted alone. Other board members had approved her actions. All had fueled her desire for control. They bore responsibility for every absurd penalty, every dubious rule alteration, and every sneaky maneuver. If Karen had been ready to engage in actual illegal activities, what else had this HOA been hiding behind closed doors? I was determined to uncover the truth. My first step was to do something Karen would never have anticipated. I traced the flow of money. The advantage of an HOA is that from a legal standpoint it operates like a business. Every single dollar collected through fees, penalties, and fines must be properly documented. Every purchase, every service contract, every so-called community enhancement project should leave a clear documentary trail. Since Karen was no longer in charge, the HOA had become exposed. Without a leader to conceal their actions, I requested a thorough audit. Initially, the HOA stalled my efforts. They claimed I had no rights to access their financial documents, insisted the records were confidential, and argued only the board members could review them. They were mistaken. State law grants me, as a member who pays dues, full rights to inspect the financial records at any time. If denied access, legal measures can be pursued, and that was exactly what I did. I filed a lawsuit not only targeting Karen, but the entire HOA board as well. The accusations included financial mismanagement, fraud, and unlawful use of the funds. Lawsuits tend to be slow, but subpoenas work considerably faster. Within 7 days, the HOA was legally required to hand over their financial records. The moment I began scrutinizing the numbers, it became clear why they had been so eager to keep everything secret. This was not merely poor management, it was outright embezzlement. Thousands and thousands of dollars had gone missing. Tens of thousands of dollars had vanished into unknown expenses, community upkeep fees that were never actually spent on maintenance, contracts with vendors that were completely fabricated, fake bills, exaggerated costs, and worst of all, direct transfers into Karen's personal bank account. Karen was far more than just a controlling figure. She was a thief. I gathered every suspicious transaction, every missing cent, every incriminating detail, and created a comprehensive report. Then I made it public. I distributed copies to every homeowner in the area. I sent them to the local media. I forwarded them to the state's HOA regulatory agency. Afterward, I called for another urgent HOA meeting. When I reached the community center, the entire neighborhood had already gathered. The room was filled to capacity, buzzing with anger and quiet discussions. The residents had seen the report. They understood what was coming. The remaining HOA board members sat at the front like a firing squad, waiting their fate. None had spoken publicly since Karen's arrest. They had attempted and failed to reclaim control. I approached the microphone, raising the stack of financial papers. "This," I announced, my voice cutting through the silent crowd, "is how the HOA stole from us." A ripple of murmurs swept through the attendees. Over the past 3 years, this board had embezzled more than $80,000 from the community, funds that were meant to be used for, focused on preserving the neighborhood, boosting property values, and financing actual projects. I flipped through the documents, pointing out major transactions. Here is a $12,000 charge for security services that never existed. Here is $5,000 spent on community outreach, which surprisingly was transferred solely to Karen's personal account. Here are $19,000 in mysterious maintenance fees that did not cover a single repair. The murmurs grew louder, escalating into full-scale shouting. I had not even finished. "Here is the best part," I said, holding up the final document. "Do you recall all those fines you have been paying, the ones Karen and her board fabricated? Well, they were never deposited into the HOA account. Instead, they were funneled into Karen's bank." Gasps and shouts erupted. "She stole from us," someone yelled. "We paid for this community," another voice exclaimed. A woman standing at the back waved her copy of the report. "I have been fined 7 times in the past year. Where exactly did my money go?" I turned to the board members, who appeared ready to be sick. "Would someone care to explain?" Greg, one of the timid board members, adjusted his tie, his voice trembling. "We had no idea Karen was—" "Oh, really?" I interrupted. "Because your signature is on nearly half of these transactions. Are you expecting us to believe you blindly approved everything?" Greg fell silent immediately. I faced the crowd once again. "Here is what will happen next. This board is finished." A loud cheer erupted. "We are going to remove every single one of them tonight by voting them out." Another roar followed. "Then we will take legal action." The room exploded with energy. One of the board members attempted to slip away quietly, but was unsuccessful. The neighbors physically blocked the exit. Everyone was furious. Years of being intimidated, fined, and burdened with countless small charges had led to this moment. Greg tried to speak again, but it was irrelevant. The vote took place immediately. It was unanimous. Every single board member was dismissed, yet I was not finished. The next day, I met with my lawyer and formally pressed charges against Karen and the entire previous board for embezzlement, fraud, abuse of power, and much more. Karen, she was not going to escape this one. The HOA was dismantled, and every homeowner received refunds for the fines. As for me, I parked all 3 cars in my driveway that evening. It was Saturday. Sitting on my porch, I opened a beer and smiled because the HOA was no more, and I had brought it down. The collapse of the HOA was not a sudden explosion, but rather a slow-motion implosion. It was a domino effect of panic, resignations, and total financial ruin. Once the entire board was voted out by the neighborhood, the real legal nightmare began. Lawsuits piled up relentlessly. The state's HOA Regulatory Board launched its own investigation into Karen and her associates. It turned out that my little exposé barely scratched the surface. There were even more missing funds, additional expenses funneled into personal accounts, and a lot more to uncover. A landscaping bill amounting to $25,000 had been paid for Karen's private backyard makeover. Greg, the former treasurer, lost it immediately. The moment the auditor began investigating, he turned into a desperate snitch, eager to dodge prison time. He revealed everything: how they forged receipts, how they overcharged residents, and how Karen had coerced homeowners into contributing to special projects that were actually slush funds for her personal expenses. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. The judge wasted no time. Karen's defense was utterly weak. She tried to play the victim, blaming clerical mistakes and misunderstandings, but then the prosecution presented security footage of her vandalizing my car. That evidence alone crushed any hope she had of convincing the court she was innocent. The best part is that the lawsuits drained her finances completely. She fought to keep her home, but mounting legal fees overwhelmed her. The court decided she must pay restitution to the homeowners she had defrauded. With no money left, she faced only one solution: selling her house. And what a reversal of fortune it was. She put the house on the market at a high price, thinking she could still walk away with some profit. However, this neighborhood was no longer under her control. Without her authoritarian rule, property values began to fall. It turns out, managing a community like a dictatorship does not exactly attract buyers. I made sure she never got what she wanted. When potential buyers came to see the house, I made it my personal goal to be outside, washing my 3 cars and chatting with neighbors to ensure they were fully aware of the kind of HOA that once ran this place. "Yes, Karen was the one who ruined this neighborhood," I said casually while shaking my head. She took thousands from homeowners and ended up getting arrested. Now that she was leaving, the neighborhood was finally starting to recover. I watched as the interested buyers disappeared one after another. The price kept dropping lower and lower until she had no other option but to sell it for far less than the property's actual value. Karen packed up in the dead of night with no goodbye or farewell speech, just a U-Haul leaving the driveway, filled with the remnants of her miserable reign. Standing on my porch, beer in hand, I watched her drive away for the last time. And for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt peace. The HOA was finished. The board members were facing financial disaster. Karen was gone, and my driveway was now completely, beautifully, and legally filled with my 3 cars. No more fines, no more warnings, no more threats. I parked my Porsche front and center just because I could, threw my feet up on the porch railing, and enjoyed the view. The war was over, and I had won.